Chapter 47 Matrons. The witches entered their portals and were astounded by the thick magic power in the area. The air itself was suffocating with magic power, polluted many times over by the twisted rituals of witchcraft. They were greeted by other witches. Many of them nodded and welcomed them. Melumbra was not yet with them. She was probably collecting the witches that were lost in the portals. The black blades interfered with the ley lines in intended locations, so they needed to be regathered. Luckily, it was easy enough to track where they might be. She would follow the portals one by one until they were all found. Until that time, Alyssa looked around her with unease and curiosity. A woman who wore an old dress with an apron covered in flour approached them. She had weight on her and looked like one who cooked often by her hands and apron. "I welcome you all, new and old. There are fires nearby if you are cold. I am Tabitha, I care for prisoners. I bake and cook for you. Eat human flesh without permission, though, and I'll make you into stew." Alyssa was not sure what to make of her, but let herself be guided around the camp. The looks she received were those of disdain. They did not truly want more witches in this place. There simply was no room for them. Now even food would have to be gathered. Whatever talents she had would surely not be worth it. Alyssa looked to her little bat Vinny and hoped for the best. Tabitha the cook offered cookies and baked goods to the prisoners. Those who took them and ate them seemed to have some sort of drugged effect. "I made these goods just for thee. Be dears now and come with me." It was annoying to listen to her talk, so Alyssa immediately made herself useful. "I am a witch who can communicate and control bats. Is there a use for me?" Tabitha smiled and rose to her full height. "Yes, indeed. What power and what fun! A job which suits you is finding the blind one. It is a white bat great in both kills and size. If you can command it, then you shall be his eyes." Was the rhyming really necessary? Truly? Alyssa understood and went where the old witch directed. A great many beasts were caged or chained, each controlled by a different witch. How did they care for so many beasts? It was beyond her. Then she noticed boxes and crates. Trade goods? Supplies from the city? The witches were trading with neighboring towns and cities? That was not the witch's way. The look on her face caught the attention of some. They knew. They understood this was not the way. She approached one bat that, when she looked upon it, marveled her. It was larger than 12 feet. Its wings were so wide it would be difficult to navigate the swamp. There was no way it could move easily. Another named Nore bound most of the beasts with her great magic. "I am Nore, the Witch of Thorns. I bind this beast. Yet I see you have power enough to control it. We are fortunate to have a witch such as you, for then it will be able to hunt for us. Dare you speak to the blind one?" Her little bat had chirped with fear at the cry of this thing. Alyssa knew she must prove herself. It might have been beyond her before, but not now. Not after power was given to her by 2 witches. She had strength enough now and would have strength enough for some time. She reached out her hand and let out a screech to the beast, who then perked up its ears and opened its glazed eyes. It was indeed the blind one. She said unto him, both with words and in its mind, "I shall be your eyes. Tonight we hunt man-flesh." The large bat was ready and willing. The Witch of Baking, in the meantime, moved to where they kept the prisoners. She showed the other witches the impressive number of humans who baked bread and other goods for their own consumption. In the case of witches, they ate meat. Tabitha took care to fatten up the humans before she cooked them. She even let them breed and grow like weeds. Human meat was a delicacy that most witches wanted to eat. She smiled as she dumped a rather large tub of cookies into a feeding trough where the children ate ravenously. She petted their heads lovingly and noted the fire was going out, so she blew a handful of flour to reignite it. Although flour was quite flammable, especially fine flour, it seemed like magic how easily and how brightly the flame grew. Alyssa attempted to warn Nore, the Witch of Thorns, about a potential threat. "If the humans that come for us come for you, know that they have weapons to bypass wards and magical sentries. They can even mess with Melumbra's portals." The Witch of Thorns was old and glad for the younger witch's concern. "You needn't concern yourself. No human would come here willingly, would they? Well, they will not face only wards, but beasts of the bog." Alyssa thought of the men who hunted her, who so easily cut down her friends. Well, as close to friends as a witch could have. This human, I think he would come for us if he could. I fear him. Noré calmed herself behind her tribal mask of thorns. It was impossible to see skin under the cloth, which appeared to be tattered pieces of cloth, tied together by barbed wire. Upon closer inspection, it seemed as if Noré's mask stabbed into her face. Her deadened skin looked as if it grew over the mask. Her eyes were still visible. They were strong and fierce. "Fear not, little one. We are safe here." "Strange, that's the same thing Isadora told the other witches earlier," Alyssa said to herself. She would not underestimate the humans. Not this time. Chapter 48. Safety's End. Finding the right direction was more of a chore than actually getting there. In the end, it came down to one thing, which was effective and rarely considered against witches. Use the nose of a dog, or in this case, a jackal. Sven managed to catch a scent and put an end to the confusion immediately. Additionally, they figured out the relative direction of the sun court from the bog. Moving through the bog was not as simple. The marsh had more natural barriers and difficult places to walk. Strange plants and insects, which might be poisonous, were abundant. Sven led the way as best he could, every so often stopping and using a combination of scent and tracks to guide him. The witches in this place made no real effort to conceal themselves. They had never had to face an army. Who would dare enter their bog and face a coven of their size? In this respect, they were less prepared than the more alert coven near Xing. The men's morale was low, and they felt uncertain of what they should do next. They were not told where they were going. They weren't sure where they were, and only Darius knew the direct route home. They were stuck for now, following wherever this madman led. Still, the argument could easily be made that he won the last battle, and he wasn't here to annihilate all the witches, just the ones they had missed. Still, they had reason to complain throughout the journey. The marsh was unforgiving, and they knew it. Sai had to point outward as he found them. He was quick to sense them, impressing the more skilled and experienced magus. It might simply be he had a natural talent for detection or analytical skills in the field. Mina revealed magic which was used to look through the water's reflection to see through the water. Essentially, they used this magic as a means to use water puddles to spy ahead. Its range was limited, but was useful for getting a look from different angles or to spot creatures hiding in the marsh. The creatures who attacked usually struck at those lagging behind. This was a mistake which cost them. Kenson was quick to cut down whatever beasts the mire had to offer and were foolish enough to strike. There were simply too many men, and the desperate creatures were easily cut down. Eventually, the creatures learned their lesson. Then another problem arose. Wards started popping up. They were a good sign in truth. It was a sign they were getting closer, and a sign that they were, at the very least, heading the correct direction after all. The restlessness of the men eased. The black weapons which they were quickly growing accustomed to using disabled the wards. These wards were less subtle and more about alerting the coven rather than doing harm to those who wandered into the bog. All the same, the black steel weapons disrupted whatever magic it touched. In the first encampment which they encountered, the witches appeared as townsfolk. They were busy gathering wood or harvesting magically grown crops. It seemed they had many herbs to gather and mushrooms to inspect. They worked diligently, and it appeared as if none of them suspected the possibility of an attack. There were no signs of familiars or enthralled patrols. The witches' numbers were high, and all ages were represented. Before attacking the relatively defenseless targets, Darius had the mages prepare spells to silence the witches, and he made sure to cut off obvious escape routes before the attack began. It was almost laughably easy. The witches weren't looking for them, and relatively few noticed the strange quiet. The silencing spell washed over them in groups. It was easy for men like Henson and Meredith to sneak up on them and slit their throats. Though they might cry out, they made no sound under the effect of silence. They killed a dozen before one managed to wave a torch enough to get the attention of others. It was too late. In the silence, the black-bladed men were upon them like thieves in the night. The witches were disorganized and unprepared. The witches doing this work must not have known combat for quite some time. The elite would not be so easy. A matron would soon be upon them if they were not careful. The prisoners had been broken mentally. These slaves had broken spirits. They had been forced into deals and pacts. Their spirits were drained from them, then forced to do whatever the witches wanted. Women were treated as breeding stock and usually were treated in a manner more cruel than the men. Good-looking ones had burns or cuts on their face to make them less attractive. Men were humiliated and emasculated. Rebellion had long since left their minds. In some cases, they weren't even under the control of magic. They simply had no means of escape. Prisoners in these circumstances were likely to be enemies. They might have some misguided loyalty or think unusual activity was a trick. This bizarre prisoner situation made it difficult to even attempt saving them. It was better to assume that they were enemies. It wasn't exactly clear if they should kill them or not. One ran off, crying out, "Intruders are upon us! To arms! Our lives for the Grand!" He did not get to finish his cries before Darius sent a blade through his skull. The fool even ran to a place where they had already butchered the witches who guarded it. Augustana, rather saddened by the state of the prisoners, inspected them closely. They must have been slaves for years. There were signs of torture, long ended. From the look of their hands, they were forced to farm and raise animals, which was no easy task, considering the swamp had very little usable land. It essentially had to be tamed. The men looked like they worked tirelessly without the need for motivational beatings or proper food. The humans were simply ignored. If they died, the witches would simply raise the dead. It was clear some undead worked the fields, but ultimately they did not handle the crops. There were some jobs only the living could do. Augustana looked upon the undead with disgust. She raised her sword to the sky and then pointed it at a single undead worker in the field. Instantly he was purged of necrotic power and fell limp into the swamp. "It disgusts me that the dead are made to walk again." She spoke out loud to no one in particular. Darius chuckled at the sign of the undead tilling fields. Disgusting, but efficient. Better a corpse be used to till fields than a hard-working father. Hold fast, warriors. Secure the perimeter and take a moment to rest in this clearing. We need to carve a path to the focal point of their rituals. Once again, he was greeted by many disgruntled mages. "This has gone on far enough. End this now. We end this expedition and return home. We were not sent to slaughter the Grand Coven." Darius supposed not, but looked around. "We have no casualties yet. After some time to rest, we press on. Dealing a blow to the matrons of the Grand Coven will create a power vacuum. The alliance of the Grand Coven may very yet fall. We need not kill them all. We need only do significant damage, then return home." The mages countered, "We make a powerful enemy, one that will cost us." Darius was unconcerned. "Yes, most likely, but you already made them enemies, and better they be dealt with immediately. Better to weaken them now while we have a chance. There are times when opportunities appear. Complacency makes fools of us all, Captain. Better to spend time reaching our objectives than following worthless pursuits." The captain had heard enough. "This is a worthless pursuit. You simply fail to see it. This coven was never our enemy. We have made a powerful foe. And for what?" Darius hid his true reason behind an easier-to-believe one. "Melumbra can teleport scores of witches. You think we can just leave her be? No, that's why I can't simply retreat when we have forces enough to end her. Without their main source of transportation, they will challenge Xing no more." Darius had his own objective, of course. For every witch slain, they extended the life of the world. They would be a reduced threat not only to their neighbors, but to Xing itself. Eventually, a coven of this size unchecked would be a problem which a meager force of 400 would not be large enough to deal with. They needed to deal with the witches unprepared, but with weaponry. No discussion nor complaint was changing his mind. He was done arguing. He needed to make quick work of Melumbra, and soon. Without her, it was doubtful they'd have the same mobility. Kenson and Sven approached. "We appreciate what you're doing, Colonel Orn. Few commanders realize the threat witches pose. By killing even 12 just now, without a casualty, would be a miracle if they were on the attack. We will keep going, yes?" Kenson said, clearly tired. Sven looked around. "Your men are disgruntled and angry. They did not bargain for this scale of hunt. They came to kill 30, not 1,000. It is somewhat understandable." Augustana spoke up from nearby. "That is true, but we did not kill 30. Some of them got away. Darius has been true to his word. He will kill them." Kenson decorated that fact with another. "He is willing to kill 100 to get to 6. This greatly reduces the threat which is posed for another time. If what he says comes to pass and we fail to kill the matrons, they will likely spread out across the world, yes? We can't give them that opportunity. The goddess will not stop us, and they are unprepared." Meredith chimed in with another thought. "We better act while we can. We don't know how long she'll be preoccupied. It is better to act quickly. The information I gave her will keep her busy for a while." Darius gave Meredith a warning glare. Don't say more about the state of the world. They didn't need to know that everything would die in about 400 years if the machine spoke true, or that the lesser gods would flee the world little by little and the greater gods were already gone. Their power slowly drained from the world. The end of the world might not be upon them. Ending these witches was a convenient first step. He was hoping to speak more to Melumbra, who might know more about Blackmaw. Attention shifted to a warning Mina shouted. Bats! Lots of them! This again. Was it the same witch as before? No, it was most likely the same trick under a different witch. He readied his weapon as bats swarmed all sources of light, creating thick darkness. Darius ran with Kenson before the screeching and darkness separated them. He used his armor as a means to keep bats at bay, while Kenson used those eyes of his to see well in the dark. From what he could tell, they were about to attack, probably using witch spawn or the undead to supplement her attack. The armor kept the many bats from getting too close to Kenson. This allowed Kenson to ready his cold iron daggers and move towards the source of the magic. In moments like this, he missed Claire. Then he swallowed hard. Claire. No, he needed to focus now. He let his eyes reveal the way to the source of magic. Darius made his way into the darkness of the swamp. He ignored the bulk of the bats and went for the true threat, the witch who controlled them. She let out a loud screech, seemingly an attempt to alert other witches rather than as an attack cry. It didn't exactly explain the situation. Shouldn't she attack in numbers? Darius made his way through the swamp while he waited for Kenson to take position. He heard a voice. You killed them. He didn't know that voice, or at least he didn't recognize it. He had killed many things. Out of the flood of bats came one larger than a man. It had monstrous strength and screeched loud enough to cause ears to bleed. It wasn't a spell. His armor wouldn't protect him. He stood fast and tossed a small dagger to the mouth of the beast. It bit down on the blade, but that was enough to shut it up. He readied his sword and rushed the monster. The small bats made it impossible to see, and he hoped his opponent couldn't see either. And he was right. It couldn't. He struck down with a blade, only to see the beast counter with a claw. The glazed white eyes met his yellow. Blind, he muttered. The blind one was upon him. It began to thrash at him, and his armor did not protect him completely from such a beast. He grunted as the witch cried out through the bats. You killed my friends! You killed them right in front of me! He supposed it must have been a younger witch, since she was being quite the hypocrite. He held his own and slashed at the blind one's wings. If nothing else, he could take a wing from it, and that would more or less disable it. It wouldn't be easy prey, but at least it couldn't fly. He let it bite into his armor just so he could dig his blade into the wing. The beast bit into his armor, but did not draw blood. Darius kicked the beast in the chest after the work on its wing was done. Its mouth opened, and he struck at it again. Smaller bats began to circle around the blind one, joining it and becoming one with it. Did it repair itself by absorbing magic from the smaller bats? It seemed so. In that case, it wasn't going to be easy to kill it. Darius decided to get her talking. Then you were in the encampment of Xing? Alyssa was enraged that he didn't even sound like he cared. She yelled and revealed her position even more than she already had. We were running away. We were going to leave and never bother you again, and you killed them. You tried to kill me too. You and the damned elves. Darius supposed it was the one with the frizzy hair that turned into a bat. He parried the bat's claws and only made light counters with swordsplay, taking no major risks of getting injured. He needed to wait. The opening he needed would come. He managed to talk between breaths, meaningful in his words. You thought you could murder a town of woodsmen and just walk away? You play a victim well for a murderess. It was almost time. He kept the blind one at bay a while longer, though it seemed to share her rage, making its attacks more violent. Unlike the bat, he wouldn't heal so easily. It could risk exchanging blows. Alyssa let out an angry scream. Why won't you just leave us alone? She attempted to cast hexes of black magic his way. Little bolts of purple, and much to his satisfaction, all of her attention was on him. The magic did not harm him. His armor was more than enough for the bolts of magic from the witch. He was hoping for Melumbra, but it seemed she did not come. Not yet. The blind one was actually an opponent meant for a squad. Darius couldn't really damage it enough without it calling bats to it and healing whatever damage the beast suffered. It might have just been enhanced by magic, but it was still a beast. His anti-magic weapons did very little against it, nothing beyond ordinary sword cuts. He positioned himself where the witch might hit the bat. Her hexes missed the beast, but he tried batting them into the bat against his black steel. It did not work, although it was worth the try. The beast scratched at him with fury and attempted to scream in his face once again. Of the beast's tactics, that was the worst. He had to reposition himself behind it or fling a blade to its mouth to dampen its cry. He glanced around him, making sure his footing would hold steady. The beast was doing a good job of forcing him deeper into the mud. It had some wits after all, or perhaps the witch was guiding it. He kept moving, hoping to tire the beast, except he himself would be tired before long. A minute of true combat went by with him parrying and making strikes. Armor was heavy, and if he pushed too hard, it might result in a mistake. He put out as little effort as possible and tried to force the beast to give chase. It was finally time for the battle to turn around. Kenzan leapt out of the shadows and struck 2 blades of iron into the witch. She was so intent on ending Darius that she gave little thought to her surroundings. With 2 blades now in her back, Kenzan used his silver sword with practiced motion and went for the throat. He drew blood, but was the cut not deep enough? As the silver went for the cut, she did not bleed. Her little bat, who always hung around her shoulder and arm, raced to her neck before the blade reached skin. The little bat let out its final cry and dangled helplessly, bleeding out. This caused the witch to shriek a burst of magic, which blew Kenzan back. The blind one raced to her aid, grabbing her by the shoulder with its talons. He lifted her into the sky and carried her away. "Vinny!" she cried out to her little dead bat as it fell to the floor. She hated the hunters. She would have her vengeance. She swore it over and over as she tried her best to manage her wounds. Alyssa let out little yelps every now and again while she tried her best to dig out the iron. It was useless. She could only hurt herself more midair. She could not turn into a bat with the damage these cold iron daggers did either. She was hurt, but she hardly intended to stop. She let out tears of rage. In just one day it seemed that everything she used to care about was gone. Darius took a breath and spoke to Kenzan after she had left and the bats began to clear. "I thought you would have killed her." Kenzan looked at the dead bat on the floor. Her pet protected her neck, but it's likely she will not heal from those wounds. Cold iron prevents most forms of fey magic. Witchcraft will not easily heal it. Darius caught a glimpse of where the bat carried her away. The bat didn't have time to do anything clever, like lead them in a false direction. It took her to the main encampment for sure. He made note of the direction, but made certain not to lose focus. He pointed carefully into the woods. "That way. She went that way." Darius tried to breathe as Scipio approached. Scipio looked over the area. That was a pointless attack, sloppy and quick. We were in formation and prepared. Why would they attack then? It was true some witch spawn and undead attacked with the bats, but this didn't really serve as effectively as multiple witches joining forces. Darius explained as he kept watching the distance where the bat flew. "It was meant more for me, I suspect. A plan made by one who has never seen war, nor had need of tactics. She has been wounded and has shown the path to another encampment. There are no doubt many in this bog." Scipio couldn't help but notice the giant bat that was a breed apart from anything they had seen before. "They have powerful beasts. I'll keep my eyes open." In his hand, Scipio gripped a bow. Darius noted it. "You are using your bow?" Scipio nodded, but the look on his face was not one of satisfaction. "I do not need to be a good shot to hit a target of that size. My hands have steadied slightly, but I am not the marksman I once was. Still, I can use my bow. The damage to the hand heals slowly still. We may need my bow in the battle to come." Darius noted his arrows were different. "Where did you get those?" Scipio motioned away. "A gift from the elves. Strange they had silver, but not cold iron." Kenzan marveled at the arrows. Cold iron is not something that is easily found, and the elves would see it as a pollution. The silver is a fit weapon as well. I use it myself. Darius kept sight on the direction they needed to go. "Rally the men after they've had a rest. We need to hurry. It's likely that after this next strike we'll need to go back to Xing. You can tell them that one more strong blow is all it will take. Tell them we have found one of the witches that fled, so their extermination should soon be upon us." The men would be glad to hear it. They've had quite enough of witches for this day.